let's do another redshift render. Let's do our preset. Let's go in there and let's do force object and just grab our smoke. Where is it? Smoke, 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 smoke. There we go. We could make a render node for it, but I guess this would be fine. Just call this smoke. We need to do a material for it. So let's go to material, type RS material builder. Just call this smoke. Let's type volume. And let's plug it into volume. All right. So Redshift volume shading is very simple, like not that great. They're gonna make it better apparently at some point. They haven't yet, but should be fine for what we're doing here. So let's assign this to our smoke object. And what we need to do is on our lights, I want to go on my mesh light. You have volume contribution. Let's increase our volume contribution. So that will, if you have this to 0, the light will not influence volumetrics. If you have it a little bit higher, then it will. So if you ever have volumes and you're done not seeing anything when you shine lights on, this is why you need to really enable that. Oh, and yeah, let's go to Rob and let's go to smoke. Right, let's just disable that. All right, so you can see some stuff here is already happening. Probably what I want to do is I want to already mat out my environment from our smoke chip. So the proper way I like to do is like normally if you want to use an object as a mat inside of Redshift, there's a mat tab here. You might be inclined to just enable that. But a better way, what I like to do is make a null, call this mat, and on smoke object here, you can say forced mat. So which objects do we want to use for a mat? So I guess what we want to use is rndr underscore star, so everything that starts with render. And you can say mat parameters from. You select your mat null, where is it? Now it will grab the mat parameters from this thing. So say enable mat. So now that should mat out all of our objects that are in our scene. I'm just going to press render. Now we do parameter object node. That is weird. Oh, by the way, we did actually have a rndr smoke node. Let's just, by the way, just grab our rndr smoke node. So that's why it's okay. Then we want everything except for rndr smoke on the forced mat. Else that's not going to work. So I've just manually here selected the ground boxes, ground and boxes. This seems to work now. Let's go back to ACES 709. So this seems to work. Probably, let's just have a look. What we can probably do is turn off. We can turn off secondary GI, I think, because we don't have any secondary bounces anyway. So there's really like a ton of noise. You might be inclined to go to settings and then just crank up the volume samples, but that's not going to work. Let me just really quickly show you by just adding like a ton of volume samples. Let me just press render again. As you can see, we still have a lot of noise there. So a lot of the noise probably comes from the GI. So we do probably want a little bit of volume samples increase. So let's do 256. But probably the most noise just comes from the GI. Probably let's do 1024. We could just do GI bounces to 1 because we don't really have any. There's no multi-scatter inside of Redshift. So you can see the increasing the GI samples really cleans that up. So it's not necessarily volume samples, it's mostly GI. That makes it very noisy. Right, so there's that. So there's some other stuff that maybe we could tweak. So one thing that might be nice is like, let's just have a look at a frame that has a lot of electricity. Let's turn off our smoke. So let's go to a frame that we can clearly see a lot of electricity going on. Maybe let's make it red so we can easier see what's going on. Right, so this seems to be a frame where there's a lot of electricity. So let's see what this is going to look like. So if I'm honest, I think probably the smoke is still a little bit too thick. You should probably emit less smoke. But I'll leave it for now. But a thing that I do want to discuss is that maybe you decide that you want more light coming off the electricity and maybe like a little bit more of a fall off instead of this super diffused thing. But maybe you don't want to necessarily just increase the intensity of the light because that will also influence our main render, right? So what we can do is use a take. So there's actually something called takes. So if you go on here top to take list, if you don't have it, I think you can go over here to take list. You can open it there. What it will allow us to do is to create a take, which is essentially an override for your scene, and you can manually change some stuff on, for example, one render. So I could go to add take and call this, for example, smoke render. You can go into our mesh light here, and you can say on our intensity here. So let's say intensity. You can say include intake. It will mean I can include the I can increase it for just this this take, and then can go to, let's go back to our main take for now. Let's go to our out smoke, and then we can say render with take. Let's put to smoke render. I think if you do the IPR, I think you always need to have it enabled here, but let's just try it out for now. So if you submit it, so it's just an easy way to sort of override these values. So if we were to jump back and forth between these two, we'd keep the values on for our specific take. Let me just go switch to this mode. So what I could do now is I could increase the intensity here to, let's say, 220. Maybe I also want to, let's include just the volume contribution scale. So just crank that up because it was quite low. Maybe it's a little bit extreme. Probably what we want to do maybe in this smoke, let's say that the only light that we want to use is our mesh light. We don't want to use our HDRI, so let's only use the key light in our mesh light. Because the HDRI is also now probably, I don't, maybe we didn't, did we have volume? No, we didn't have volume contribution enabled on it, so might not necessarily make a big difference. I think I'm gonna, you know what, I think I'm gonna decrease the intensity instead of increasing it. But just the main point being that you can have control for your individual ROPs. So let's just render this. So I'm gonna wait for this to render one frame, and I'm gonna see what it looks like. All right, so it's still going, but I think this looks pretty cool actually. Some nice detail in there. It looks pretty magical. So it's a very different type of sim that I had initially. It's just a lot thicker with a lot more smoke, but I think this would probably look good. You can see there's noise, but again, we can just denoise this. Like the smoke is going to be an extra layer on top of our composition, so it's going to be completely fine. So yeah, I mean, if you want it to be less thick, just tweak your simulation settings. But you can see it's pretty cool already with the way this looks. We probably don't really need many AUVs for this stuff. Probably something that we do want is thinking. No, actually for the smoke, I think this should be fine because the light here is not visible. What we're now going to do is we're also going to make one for just our electricity and other volumetric stuff. And in that one, we do want some additional AUVs. So, but for this one, let's just keep it as a beauty render. Should be fine. So now let's focus on the last one. It should be our electricity and regular volumetric stuff from the top. And once we have that, we have all of the renders, and then we can render this out. Let's do redshift. And let's set that up. All right, so we have this drop here. So what we want to do there is also want to use this these matte parameters. So force matte parameters. So we don't need to change anything there. So no candidate objects. Do we already? Yeah, that's. So we want no candidate objects here. What we do want is go to redshift here, go to volumetric scattering, enable that, and let's call this environment fog, and let's just render this one. So this will just add some like fog in the entire environment, so you can see what's going on there. And there we have some extra controls with the scattering and attenuation and phase, which is quite nice. And one thing that I do want to do here is also make a take. So add a take, call this environment fog, right? And let's include in this take, I want to go to mesh light. I want to include the visibility and enable visibility, because I want my electricity to be visible here. Right, so now you can see we have our electricity in here. And let's go to our main take. Yeah, the annoying thing is that the IPR here doesn't always... It does work with final renders, but this doesn't always grab the correct, or do we have it? Oh yeah, let's assign it, by the way. Environment fog. Let's hope that it grabs it. Okay, it does grab it in this case. So what I want to do is I want to go to volumetric scattering. I'm going to increase the scattering like by quite a lot. You see now it's going to get way too bright here. But then we can change the attenuation. So let's really crank that up. Just make it really high. So 100 is probably too high, but so let's change it down a little bit. 33. 22. So essentially it will just make it sort of thicker. So let's maybe, it's going to be just a fine balance between like how many scattering and how much attenuation. You also have this phase thing. Oh, and I accidentally changed the camera, I think. So let's just press, let's go to, oh, I changed the frame. Let me just go to a proper frame again with enough electricity. Yeah, all right, so we have this phase, which you can see you can also use to sort of tweak sort of the balance. I'm not actually not sure the exact thing, like the exact things that they're sort of set for. I know how to sort of tweak them. So scattering is how much light scattering, attenuation is like the thickness of the fog, and then with phase you can sort of offset that. At least that's my interpretation of it, but if my interpretation of that is wrong, could be the case, but this is just how you can sort of, if you keep that as a sort of a rule of thumb, that you know how to at least offset this stuff. So you can see we can increase the scattering here, and then change the attenuation or the phase, lower this a little bit. I think something that looks pretty cool. We do, and you can see this also renders pretty fast. It's because we have the geolight. Like if you were to use a material light for this, it would be absolutely like super slow. Oh, and I also want my key light here to also have a little bit of volumetric, probably. So that's the stuff from the top there. So I do want some AOVs on this. So I'm going to go to AOV. So output, AOV. I'm not going to use the ROP for this because we only want a couple. I want to use volumetric. I want to use all the volumetric passes because I always forget which one I actually need. So I'm just going to use volumetric for emission and lighting. And then I also just want a regular emission. So volume, fog emission, and emission. And just let's see in our passes what it's going to look like. So you can see the volume is going to be without the electricity here. And emission is going to be this. Another thing that I found that I kind of want to do is because this is, if we, you cannot really merge those on top of each other in compositing because it'll look weird. So I'm going to make a mask for the actual geometry. So you could probably get away with actually just rendering this, and you could probably comp this, but I did it a little bit differently in my main thing. That's what I'm actually going to do. So I'm going to go onto our ROP here, our fog, and I'm going to force object electricity. So I'm going to render our electricity as well as a regular mesh here, which is going to have a little bit of a, it's going to block a little bit our mesh lights. So I'll go into our mesh lights and let's go to enable light mesh associations, and let's just disable our electricity on shadows as well. Right, so now you can see it's sort of ignoring it again. So now you get a little bit of shadow thing. But now you can see the electricity here is disappeared. What I want to do is I'm going to go to material and then type redshift incandescent. I'm going to make an incandescent material and I'm going to put it on our electricity. So let's just reload. All right, and let's increase the incandescency here, like let's say 33 or something. You can see now it's back. Let's do temperature. Let's make it a bluish again, like something like bluish. Right, so now we have a somewhat similar result that we had before. Let's do 22. So still, like, I mean, not that different, but so we have the volume here, we have the beauty. But now what we can also do is, because our electricity now is visible, and we have a similar result here. So we have the benefit of the volume light here, because if we were to turn off our volume light, for example, and only use our incandescent, and we get something like this, which is it's not really what we want. So we need our volume light, but now we have this electricity here visible. And the cool thing is now that you make a custom AUV that I like to use to mask then in compositing. So go to output and get a plus, put a plus there and put it to puzzle mat. So puzzle mat will just allow us to generate a mat object. Let's go to select our electricity object. Let's go to redshift object, settings, and let's select an object ID here. So I'm gonna, let's say 69 or 60, not 68, 69. You can do anything, but let's make it pretty high because we're gonna do some more AUVs on some of our other things in a little bit. But what we can do is in this thing, in the puzzle mat, let's go to object ID. So put the object ID, let's type 69, 69, 69. So we just get a black and white mat. Let's press render. Alright, so we have our render here. We have a volume. We have here emission. And we have a puzzle mat. You can see the puzzle mat is just not as pronounced, and it's just a little bit less harsh than the emission pass here. It says the and I just found that if you use this puzzle mat now what we're gonna do is later in compositing, we're gonna mask out the electricity here from the beauty. Then we're gonna comp that on top of the volume. But then the benefit is that we still sort of have the detail from the actual geometry, because this pass is just super harsh. And I just found it it doesn't contain any detail. Like there's no in this one, the environment fog still sort of masks it out a little bit, so you kind of have some sort of a more depth-ish information. Like if I were to increase the attenuation here, I probably don't even. I actually don't really see that in there, but point is anyway that it generated for me a little bit of better of a mask. So a couple of things more that we need to do here is let's just really increase our GI samples to like 512, or maybe in this case actually the extra GI sample. Maybe in this case we do need more volume samples because we're using the volumetric scattering. So maybe in this case it does make sense to increase volume samples here a little bit as well. You can see this also just cleans up a little bit faster. So in this case, the volume samples do make sense. Let's go to, where is it? And then we could probably get away with decreasing it over. So the GI samples in this case. So you can see it kind of depends also on the stuff that you're using, but this should look pretty good. So we have the mats, beauty stuff, the volume. So everything that we need, kind of. So let's just call this. Oh, and actually I see that I didn't use my preset here. So probably want to copy my folders from another thing here. So go to edit parameter interface, select the folder, because I don't want to reset my settings here. So that's why I'm doing it like this. Let's just put the folder on top here, press apply. Just copy this stuff over. And let's go to output. Oh, and I don't have the thing there set either for some reason. Right, so yeah, output, let's just put that in there. Let's call this environment Vogue. Right, so that's essentially almost all of the things that we need. Probably a couple of extra things that we want that I forgot to put in the main thing here. So let's enable a couple of custom AUVs on this thing for our beauty render, which can make our life a lot more easy in compositing. So let's use a couple of more of these puzzle mats. So let's just say that our ground boxes, so let's go to settings. So let's say our main boxes are going to be object ID 1. Our ground boxes are going to be object ID 2. Our ground probably our ground and our ground boxes can have the same object ID because they're sort of the same material. So we have our boxes and our things. I guess we could say maybe our orbs could be 3. So let's go to our AOVs here. Let's add an AOV. Let's go puzzle mat. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 3. Object ID. Let's just have a look what that looked like. Domain. Yeah, so the orbs are probably a little bit pointless that we put them in there because you can't see them, but you can already see that it is going to be useful to have this. I mean, we have the we can max out the boxes and we can max out the background. So in compositing, you can just, for example, select that you want the just the green as a mask or the red as a mask. So we're going to have that as a mask. Another AUV that I want to use, it's going to be super useful, is we have this sample attribute, right? Or our distance attribute on our boxes. And we can actually write that out as an attribute. So it's a distance thing. And we can use that to sort of change some colors on specific boxes in our composite. So what we need to do for that is go into our box material and then type AOV. Let's do scalar to AOV. And let's plug in that thing after the material. And then let's type attribute. And the attribute is called dist. So let's type dist. Let's plug it into our AOV input here. And let's type dist over there. So I'm just going to pipe it into the AOV input. And now one more thing that we need to do is go to our actual AOVs. Add a custom AOV. So if we're just gonna, not translucent, like custom. We need to name it the same as our AOV, so dist. And now if we render, we have a dist or a dist AOV. So let's wait for this to render. To do the radius point cloud, always takes a little bit. Right, so that's going to render. And then you can see we get a black and white mask here of our distance, which should be pretty useful. Maybe so this can be used, for example, to color it. Maybe we can write it out as another way as well. Maybe like if we want to specifically grab like our center box, maybe what we could do is also write something else out. So maybe what we could do instead of doing this black and white thing, let's do another AOV. Let's do color AOV. Let's do color to AOV. Let's plug this into color. Let's do a ramp in between. Let's grab actually our ramp that we already had. Let's plug it in between there. Let's make this R, so red, green, and blue. And then call this the second, so the color AOV, let's call this box mat or something. So then we can go to our output here. Do another custom one. Let's call it box mat. Let's press render. Maybe just for now, let's switch over to brute force, so we don't have to wait for the radiance cache to cook while we check out if our AOV actually works. Well, let's just turn it off completely for now. It's going to be faster. All right, so let's go to a box mat. And you can see now we get a sort of, let me just grab maybe a frame where we can actually see our center one as well. It's probably going to be a little bit easier to see. So let's do... So you can see we could now grab our center one, is going to be blue. It's going to be some red ones. So now we can have some more control over those pieces as well. Let me just really quickly go back to the thing here. So red, green and blue. Maybe we want one more thing. Maybe we could also say that we want the most outer ones maybe just to be white. See, that's actually gonna work. Yeah, so now the black ones will be white, so then we could mat those out with just a white mask. So essentially then we have everything that we kind of need. So now all we need to do is to sort of batch render these out and then do our compositing. So there's actually one more pass that I want to put on both of these, and that's actually we want the Z-depth pass that we have on the main thing here, or on this one. We want the Z-depth pass to actually also be on the electricity and the smoke pass. It's mainly because we also want to use the depth for the electricity to get to get a proper depth blur where the electricity is also visible, because if we don't have that, we don't get a proper Z-depth. And because we have the actual object in here as well, with the mat and stuff, that will it will use the mat object for generating the Z-depth as well, so we don't have anything to worry about in that regard. So let's just go to output AUV and let's just put one more AUV here. So Z-depth, let's just do let's see what I always forget what how exactly I set it up. Let's do it. You know what? Let's make it 32-bit. Right, full and normalized. Let's go to 50, full, normalized, 32-bit. All right, and let's do AV here in the smoke. Let's do Z-depth normalized 50. All right, so that's the Z-depth. So then we can also use that for our compositing. Right, so now that the batch render is out, I prefer using deadline. I have a video on how to use deadline. You don't have to use deadline, but it's just useful for rendering multiple renders. Essentially what it is just a render management tool to sort of queue renders, and then they will just render in the background. And if your machine crashes and restarts, it's fine because it will just start back up again. It doesn't matter if the program crashes. So you can see this is my like I have a second machine there that also has a Redshift license, so I recommend probably rendering through that. It's free for up to 2 machines, but I'm just going to show you how to. Well, if you were to do it with deadline, all you would need to do is just make a deadline node and just plug all of those in, and then submit it to deadline. If you're not going to use deadline, you can still batch render. What you need to do is you need to select those things. And then I think I need to check where it's located again. You need to disable block rendering. I always forget where it's located. So let me just really quickly go through the system settings here. So it's located in the main tab. So main, and then you need to disable non-block current frame rendering. You need to do that on all of your ROPs. Because if you don't do that, this won't work. So you cannot chain them up if you don't do that. So non-block current frame rendering. And then essentially what you can just do is go to the last one, select it, and then either put it to frame by frame or node by node. So node by node will just first do the top one, second one, other one. And frame by frame will just do one frame at a time. So do whatever you want. Again, that line is probably just going to be easier. Also, if your Houdini were to crash during render, it won't matter. It will just fire it right back up again because it's a command line render. So probably recommend doing that. So now that we have the whole thing, I suggest you just render it. You can just render a couple frames. And in the next part, we're going to do the compositing for this. So I'm just going to be using my my renders that I already did. So for the main thing, but they will essentially be somewhat the same as what we have here. All the basic passes are the same. There might be slightly different with me for like the colors that you're going to be using for the mats or whatever. But that's what we're going to be using in the compositing part. So render this out. Just do a couple frames maybe for now. Just do one frame. Just so you can composite on this one frame before you do the entire sequence, because generally, like if it's going to be a very slow render and there's going to be issues with the render, you don't necessarily want to render the entire thing in one go. You could render this overnight at like half resolution. For example, you could go to output, where is it again? Main, and then override and like do 1/3 or 1/2. And just render it at a lower resolution. And then you can later swap them out with the higher resolution one in your main composition. So that might also be fine for compositing. Just don't do the final thing and then discover that there's going to be issues with your which are AOVs or renders or whatever. So render this out, and then hopefully you'll see you in the next part where we're going to be compositing.